Hey everybody, Konaja here, welcome back to Automation. Today we're going to take a look at my 2020 Viper concept car as we get ready for the 2020 Viper concept car competition showcase. There are, as of right now, it is still 2 hours until the competition quote-unquote closes. There are 76 entries for the competition that I expected about 40, maybe 50. So quite a few people seem to have really enjoyed the theme and really enjoying the concept car mentality of it. Lets a lot of freedom in, and I think the Viper overall is a car that a lot of people get very passionate about. So I think people are enjoying it. Can't wait to look through all of your cars. It's gonna take me a bit of time though. I don't want to rush this, and I want to do your cars justice. So as I go through your cars, it's going to be a little while, and since there was so many entries, it'll probably be multiple videos. Okay, so let's get to it. This is my version of the 2020 Dodge Viper. This is what I think Dodge might do with the car, or what they could do with the car. So I am basing my concept upon the idea that the Viper was basically only put out of production because it had to be. The chassis didn't meet modern safety regs, and some of the engineering had just gotten too dated for the company. So I'm going with the theory that Hyundai is going to buy into the group, and that Hyundai is going to get involved in bringing the Viper back to try and bring back some of the legacy, and maybe even do a little part sharing. So you never know, Hyundai might want in on some of this. They're looking for their own Halo car. So that's where the basis comes from. Without a doubt, this body, when you first look at it, is very C7 Corvette. And there's a good reason for that. Sports cars of today have to be of a certain shape. They have to have a certain profile, a very, different built line level than cars of old. So it's not unrealistic to me that a modern Viper could look a lot like a C7, which I realize the modern Viper does. The last generation, quote-unquote, of the Viper did look a lot like the C7. I tried to instill a lot of the styling characteristics of the different generations, but I want to take the Viper away from the normal Dodge car, because they're very wrapped up right now in the Hellcat series and the Demons and the muscle cars and the stuff like that. I think if they're going to be pushing muscle cars that badly, that significantly, I should say, there needs to be a separation between what those are and what the Viper is. One thing that I think absolutely has to stay, though, if the Viper is to continue, and I feel like this probably isn't going to happen, but I think it should, is that the V10 has to stay. So underneath of this hood, there is still a V10. But there's a twist to this V10, and I think a plausible theory as to how it could stick around. But while we're in the showroom here, let's take a look at the styling altogether. I spent quite a bit of time in the studio trying to pin down the fixtures. My original theme had a lot more exposed carbon fiber, but I was building this car to look good in BeamNG, and the carbon fiber wasn't really working too well. So I ended up going for a black car, which I don't think represents a Viper perfectly, but a black car with the quote-unquote exposed carbon. So anything you see in like the matte finish should be exposed carbon, basically. So that's where I was going with that. These wheels, I bet you a lot of people's cars are going to have these wheels, because they are super Viper looking, and they're perfect. The most challenging part for me was the back. The back of this car is very chopped off. I would love for it to have extended out a lot, but it doesn't. This is about the most I could get out of it, and it is impossible to get a spoiler on this car for whatever reason. I just cannot get spoilers to work on curved rear ends of cars, which is a major problem because spoilers are something very common in the Viper's lineage. So instead, we have this wing. It's an active aero wing that extends over the entire rear deck lid and molds into the body pretty well. I think it's a nice meet in the middle kind of situation where couldn't have the spoiler I wanted, but this wing it adds to the rear end what it would have been missing. And then we got a diffuser down there. I'm taking the Viper back to dual exhaust out the rear instead of side pipes. I'll be honest, I'm tired of the side pipes, and they make the V10 not sound as good as it could. Our V10 is going to sound a lot different than a Viper V10 anyway, and I want to make sure this thing sounds amazing. That's one thing a Viper has never done. The Viper has never been the car that people think, that car sounds amazing, and that needs to change. The front, I think, is styled very similarly to the last generation, but with a little bit of the Hyundai kind of styling language mixed in there. Another detail I like is on the roof. I've found a way to get the bubble top in there. I think that's something that's very important to the Viper look, as well as a big hood bulge. And overall, just a lot of over-the-top curves and obnoxious lines on the car. That's Viper for me. Alright, let's look now at the underpinnings of the car a little bit more closely. This is still a carbon fiber bodied car. It does weigh in at a little bit less than the previous generation, 3248, mostly due to a different engine configuration, and that engine configuration is where we should probably go to next. So under the hood, what I've done is taken the Hyundai V8 and added 2 more cylinders to it. This is not something that is wholly uncommon. I wouldn't say this is something that's necessarily easy or feasible even, but not impossible. So the example that I went off of was Alpha taking 2 cylinders off the V8 to make the V6 for their cars, and kind of applying it that theme here. So it has the same bore and stroke as the Hyundai V8, except with 2 more cylinders. That ends us up at 6.3 liters, significantly less, 2 liters less than the previous Viper engines. However, because it is a modern blocked engine and it is something with modern engineering instead of the older school mentality of the last engines, that means that it is dual overhead cam, it has VVT, it has direct injection, and it can rev to 7,900 or higher RPM. That's a pretty significant change from all the previous cars. Power-wise, it doesn't actually make more power. It makes 642 horsepower and 520 foot-pounds. However, it's doing that in a much more elegant way, and I think a way that people are going to respond to more. For the rest of the car, I wanted it to stay as Viper as possible, so it's still rear-wheel drive. Still has a manual transmission, still a 6-speed transmission, mostly because I only have a 6-speed shifter for my steering wheel. It will have an electronic limited slip differential to try and get that power to the ground. The wheels, sports compound like we said, there are 285 fronts, 315 rears. Honestly, I would like more tire, but this body wouldn't let me. Carbon fiber wheels. You have brake cooling. It has a sporty interior with the premium option entertainment qualities that buyers expect these days. Electric variable power steering. Does have all of the traction aids you could possibly want. I am very willing to let people use those now. I was hesitant about that on the last generation Viper, but I realize now how important that is. So I'm going to say that that needs to stay, and it has, to fix the problem of the last generation, the modern safety specs. So suspension tuning. Honestly, my suspension tuning is a disaster because I had a body issue. You see this body? The front is way lower than the back, and the wheels sit way lower in the front. And when you drive this car in BeamNG, the nose wants to drag the ground, and that does really bad things. So look at everything I've done on the suspension and forget it, because it's really not that good. And there you go. That's what makes up my Viper. Now, that's the details here. What I'm going to do is take my car into BeamNG, and I'm going to score it like I'm going to score everybody else's car, except I'm going to score mine horribly because I hate everything I do. So when I score my car and you look at it and you're like, oh man, I don't think my car is going to score very well, just keep in mind, I'm a harsh critic of myself. But here we go. Oh, it just feels wrong if I don't show you some of the power stats. So 218 mile an hour top speed, 4.2 to 60 is pretty slow by modern terms, but rear wheel drive manual transmission. 11.4 in the quarter is pretty darn fast, 1.24 G and 1.29 at speed, and 3247 weight, 57.2 front to rear. That's the values you most need to know. Just in case anyone's curious, it would have done a 202.64. Good luck, and you're a brave soul if you can get anywhere near that. So this is where the scoring will take place, and I'm going to run my car through the scoring process, and this is what the 10 finalist cars will be going through. The first 3 categories have to do with the looks, and yes, the looks will be judged in BeamNG. I will keep in mind of any weird things that happen, like I ran into the carbon fiber issues, but here we go. The number 1 and worth 10 points category to go through is the 10-year-old wow factor. And what I mean by that is, when I first fell in love with the Viper, I was a 10-year-old boy walking down the street, and if I saw a Viper on the street, it was a car that had the look and proportions to wow somebody. Honestly, for my car, the back has a lot of wow factor. I think it has enough going on and a real aggressive look. It definitely would have wowed me, and the sound, I think, gets high marks in wow. However, the overall look, the front and the sides, it's actually a pretty sleek and elegant kind of looking design up there, which doesn't score as high for the wow factor. We got the front lip and the canards on the side there. Gives it a little bit of a nod, but for the 10-year-old wow factor, I'm going to only give it a 6. The next one is Viper Legacy, and that has to do with the car looking the part of the cars that it came from. It needs to look like a continuation of the Viper line, and I've thrown in some elements here to try and do that. We got the very traditional crosshair grille, we got the 2 bumps on the roof, and we have large curves all over the hood, the fenders, the rear fenders. The back, I think, maybe loses some of that legacy. I can't wait to see what other people have done with the back of their car to try and bring in more of the Viper legacy. I did bring in the elements of the taillights there with the 2 stripes going back to the first generation GTS. So overall, this is a 5-point category, and I'm going to give myself a 4 on the legacy here. Third is the toughest one for me to judge, and that is timelessness, because some of the Viper generations, namely the second one and the fourth ones, depending on how you stack them up. I mean, there's different generation fights that happen there. I consider there to be 4 generations. The second and fourth are very timeless designs. The first and third, the RT10 and the SRT10, are the ones that kind of tend to look a little dated. So if I were to stack this one up with that lineup, there is actually some features in here that will date the car. The back end especially, that's a look of today. The front end, I think, is pretty timeless. The side profile, pretty timeless. The rear, I think, will date the car in the future. So I'm going to give it a 3 out of 5 for timelessness. So the next 2 categories have to do with the drivetrain. Number 1 is drivetrain plausibility. Is this something that Dodge, FCA, or whatever becomes of the group that would produce the next Viper, is that something they could actually do? And is it something that would actually work for a Viper? That's that score. The second one is the drivetrain creativity. So, what did the creator do? Did they stick with tradition fully? Did they think outside the box? Did they find a very unique solution to the problem of what will power the Viper, and that is a problem that will take some creativity because we don't really know how they're going to solve that problem. All we know is basically the previous V10 overhead valve, you know, that the standard pushrod engine that it's always had is going to go away. How they approach the next generation is kind of up to everybody's interpretation. You already heard my interpretation, was Hyundai gets involved, we take the V8 family that they have and modify it into a V10 that is much more up-to-date and works on the Viper. And I think, plausibility-wise, I would give it very high marks. I think that's something that is actually doable. Unlike maybe a brand new V10 that has no family sharing at all, that I don't think is probably very believable. So plausibility-wise, I'm going to give it an 8. There's more believable things out there. Dodge's V8s, their very stout V8 line, or any of the Fiat groups, the the Fiat Ferrari Alpha group of engines, any of those are probably going to have good plausibility in them. Creativity-wise, pretty creative solution, I think, to use the Hyundai V8 and modify it from there. However, sticking with the V10 and kind of running with it in the more modern sense, probably not the most creative of solutions, so I'm only going to give it a 4 out of 10 in the creativity. So this is where, if your car diverged away from the standard Viper, it could still score well, and that's why I made these two categories the way that they are. Alright, now we move into the driving portion of the scores. Number 1 here is something that I think is quintessential Viper, and that is the Darwin check. If the car has the ability to end your life if you do something stupid in it, it is a Viper. If it is too numbed down that if you do something silly, like when you're cruising down the highway in 6th gear and then drop down into 2nd gear and match the gas, if it doesn't have the ability to get away from you, it's not a Viper to me. Yep, looks pretty safe to me. I'm going to give this one 8 out of 10 because it doesn't instantly kill you. It gives you a little bit of leeway. Next up on the list is the handling circuit. They get all 10 cars out on the handling circuit, and I'm going to decide how fun they are to drive on fun roads. Because if a Viper isn't fun, then it's not a Viper. And what that means is, with traction control on or off, there should be a good time able to be had here. Both in a good time, it's fast, and you should be able to be kicking it sideways and, you know, just overall having a lot of fun out on the track when the conditions are safe to do so. And this is the kind of place where you can actually have fun with a car. Out on the big track, a Viper is going to be too much, and you're not going to be able to really have fun with it. If it doesn't jump over that, it's a pretty big bonus. So now, with the ESC enabled, is the car still fun? Is it still a pointable and enjoyable car around the handling circuit? Could you actually take the thing out to a short course or autocross and have fun with the thing? It's where a Viper is going to honestly struggle with, but it should be able to be used for some amount of fun, and so far this is the case. Now my car took a lot of suspension, we'll say nerfing, due to the fact I wanted it to look very good, and for that it does have some handling characteristics that aren't super fun. It will understeer at the limit, and overall it's not as pointable as your Corvette would be. However, was a Viper ever as pointable as a Corvette? I don't think so. So that's the kind of stuff I'm going to be looking for on the handling circuit. For my car, a lot more fun, understeer there, a lot more fun with ESC off than it is with ESC on. So that is a small detriment to it, not a huge one. And if the car doesn't have ESC, it's going to have to prove to me that it can be driven around here at a good pace and still be manageable. At the end of the day, I would do a much better time around here with the ESC on than I would with it off. I like that it tried to control the traction even over the jump. Very nice. Alright, so for my car, I'm going to score it on the handling circuit, which is another 10-point thing. Or sorry, this is only a 5-point. 5-point. I know my own scoring. Shut up. 5 points. I am actually going to give my car 4 out of 5, which is gracious. It's definitely being kind, but I highly doubt there's going to be many cars that aren't fun to drive here, so I wouldn't worry too much about that one. Next up on the list is trackability. So that'll be taking place on the big track, and what I'm going to be looking for is, can the car be driven lap after lap and be pushed without cooking the brakes off or without killing me? You know, can I actually rein the thing in over a lap-to-lap basis if I'm smart about how I drive? At the end of the day, people are going to want to use these cars on the tracks, whether it's a good idea or not. So it needs to have the ability to do that. Understeer like that is definitely marks off. The front end of this car could be much better planted. I expect things like that. But the front end not responding is less forgivable. Holy, that's fast. Understeer there. It's savable though. Hard on the brakes into here. Down into third gear. Did not cook the brakes off. Put the power down out. We grind a gear and it survived. Hard on the brakes again. And it did not cook the brakes off there either. That is good marks. Alright, I have been able to drive this car continually, not bin it, even with traction control off. Brakes have not cooked off. It's pretty predictable, even though it has some shortcomings in the handling. It's at least pretty predictable. So for trackability, it's not the best it could be, but I will give it a 4. And the last two on the score sheet here are Cars and Coffee and Street Presence. Street Presence, my car will not be scored for until the end of the competition. You'll see why. But Cars and Coffee means when you leave Cars and Coffee in this thing, it better be able to do a really big burnout. Alright, that should be an easy 5 points for everybody. And then you can end up on YouTube. So there you go, that is how the cars will be scored that make it to the 10 finalists in the Viper concept car build competition. My car scores 48 so far, but an additional 10 points are on the line. Once we get all of the cars reviewed, there's a total of 75, and that's about it. A whole lot of work ahead of me now. 82 entries. That is a lot of cars to go through. I don't know what I'm going to do exactly at this point for all of the cars, but we know we're going to have 10 finalists. I know I'm going to have to go through them all and score them kind of on my own for finding those 10, but I might also group together some of the other themes that I have a feeling are going to crop up through these and make videos specifically on those. I'm really excited to go through them all. I can't believe how many entries we got. Can't wait to see what you all did. Hope you enjoyed this video on my take of the Viper of the future, and you enjoyed the competition as well, and I will see you next time.